At 81 years old, I've lived through my fair share of joys and challenges. I've built a life, raised a family, and weathered the storms that come with aging. But of all the choices I've made, there's one I deeply regret: moving into a nursing home. At first, it seemed like the right decision. My family assured me that it would be a place of safety, care, and comfort. They told me I'd have everything I needed: meals prepared, medical staff nearby, and people to keep me company. It sounded like a peaceful, worry-free way to spend my later years. I believed them. I trusted that this would be a new chapter, not the closing of a book. But the reality was far different from what I had imagined. Instead of feeling secure, I felt trapped. Instead of companionship, I often faced loneliness. Instead of freedom, I found myself adjusting to rules I never agreed to. And once I was in, I learned something nobody had warned me about. Getting out wasn't as simple as I thought. That's why I'm sharing my story. If you or someone you love is considering a nursing home, I want you to hear what I wish I had known. Not to scare you, but to prepare you. Because once you make this decision, your life changes in ways you may not expect. Stay with me, because some of these truths might surprise you. And if you think this won't happen to you, trust me, I once thought the same. I'll never forget my first morning in the nursing home. I woke up in a bed that didn't feel like mine, in a room that smelled too clean, too sterile. Instinctively, I reached for the book I had been reading the night before, except it wasn't there. My nightstand, my chair, my little comforts were gone. Instead, I saw walls that weren't mine, furniture I hadn't chosen, and a ceiling that seemed to close in on me. That's when it hit me. This wasn't home. At home, my mornings had been mine to decide. I could wake up when I wanted, make my own coffee, and sit by the window as the sun rose. But here, everything ran on a schedule I didn't create. Breakfast was served at a set time, whether I was hungry or not. A nurse came in to remind me about my medication, even though I had managed it on my own for years. Lights out happened at the same time every night, no exceptions. Even taking a walk outside required permission, and often, waiting for someone to be available to assist me. It didn't take long before I started feeling like a passenger in my own life. Decisions I had taken for granted, when to eat, what to wear, how to spend my day, were suddenly out of my hands. If I didn't like what was on the menu, too bad. If I wanted to stay up late reading, I had to do it under a dim lamp, careful not to disturb my roommate. I used to enjoy cooking for myself, but that was no longer an option. Initially, I told myself it wasn't a big deal. But over time, the weight of it grew heavier. The small freedoms that made me feel like me were gone, replaced by a routine that wasn't my own. I saw it in the other residents too. People who once had vibrant lives now sat quietly, waiting for the next meal, the next activity, the next scheduled moment in a day they no longer controlled. Losing independence doesn't happen all at once. It slips away, one decision at a time, until you realize you're just another resident, following the rules. And once it's gone, getting it back is nearly impossible. If you're considering a nursing home, ask yourself, are you ready to give up the little freedoms that make life yours? Because once they're taken away, you'll miss them more than you ever thought possible. Losing my independence was tough, but I told myself I could adjust. Give it time, I thought. At least I still had my family. At least I wouldn't be alone. In the beginning, that was true. My family reassured me. We'll visit all the time, Dad. You won't even notice the difference. And in the beginning, they kept their word. My daughter stopped by every Sunday, bringing my grandkids along to brighten my day. My son called every week, checking in just like he always had. There were birthday celebrations, Thanksgiving dinners in the facility's dining hall, and pictures of the grandkids taped up on my wall. It felt like home wasn't too far away. But then, life did what it always does. It kept moving. The visits became less frequent. A Sunday here and there turned into once a month, then every couple of months. My son's calls grew shorter, sometimes skipped altogether because work was crazy. My grandkids got older, got busier. I understood, I really did. But understanding didn't make it any easier. I began noticing it in others before I admitted it to myself. Every afternoon, a few of us would sit in the common room, eyes drifting toward the front doors whenever someone new walked in. Some still had visitors, but many of us sat waiting for people who didn't come. I'd watch an old friend of mine shuffle to the window every morning, hoping today would be the day his daughter showed up. Most days, she didn't. Then came the holidays, the loneliest days of all. I told myself it was okay, that my kids had their own families, their own traditions now. I even tried convincing myself that spending Christmas watching an old movie in a room full of strangers was enough. But the truth was, it stung. The world outside my little room kept going, and I was no longer part of it. One day, I picked up the phone, thinking about calling my son. But then a thought crept in. What if he's busy? What if I'm bothering him? I put the phone down. I never told him about that moment, but I'll never forget how it felt. The hardest part isn't the silence. It's not even the loneliness. It's the slow realization that you've become a memory before you're even gone. If you've stayed with me this far, I hope my experiences have given you something to think about. If you found these insights helpful, please subscribe and share this with someone who might need to hear it. Now, let's continue. The longer I stayed at the nursing home, the more I felt like I no longer mattered. Back at home, I had a reason to get up in the morning. My days had rhythm, purpose. I'd start with a fresh cup of coffee, brewed just the way I liked it. I'd water the plants on the porch, read the newspaper, maybe fix something around the house that had been bothering me. Even the small things, sorting the mail, feeding the neighbor's cat when she was away, kept my mind sharp and my hands busy. I had a place in the world, a role to play, no matter how simple. But in the nursing home, everything was done for me. My meals were brought at the same time every day. My room was cleaned while I sat in the common area, and my laundry appeared neatly folded in my drawer. It might sound like a luxury, but in reality, it stripped away all the little things that once made me feel useful. No one needed me to do anything. I wasn't expected to make decisions, solve problems, or contribute in any way. And when you stop feeling needed, you start wondering why you even bother. I wasn't the only one who felt this way. There was a man I met, a carpenter named Bill. Back in his day, he could build just about anything with his hands. But here, there were no tools, no projects, nothing to create. At first, he'd tell stories about his past work, but over time, he spoke less and less. One day, I found him sitting alone, staring at the wall. The spark in his eyes had faded. I knew that look. It was the look of someone who had lost his reason to keep going. I won't sugarcoat it. Losing my sense of purpose drained me in a way I never expected. My mind grew sluggish. My body felt heavier. Days blurred together, each one feeling like just another step toward nothing. But here's what time has shown me. Purpose isn't about staying busy. It's about feeling like you still matter. If I could go back, I'd fight harder to hold on to that. And if you ever find yourself in a place like this, I hope you do too. Find a way to contribute, to create, to be needed. Because without that, you're just waiting for time to pass. And as the days blurred together, another harsh reality set in. I never thought I'd grow weak so quickly. Before I moved in, I was still active in my own way. I wasn't running marathons, but I could move around the house just fine. I'd cook my own meals, stretch my legs in the backyard, take a short walk to the mailbox each afternoon. If I dropped something, I bent down and picked it up. These little movements, the ones I took for granted, kept me going. But in the nursing home, everything was designed for convenience. Meals arrived on a tray, doors opened automatically, And if I needed something, anything, I just had to press a button. To start with, it felt like a relief. No more worrying about slipping in the kitchen or getting too tired halfway up the stairs. But what I didn't realize was that with every little thing I stopped doing, I was slowly losing the ability to do it at all. I saw it happening to others before I noticed it in myself. There was a woman, Margaret, who arrived around the same time I did. She walked in with confidence, always making her way down the hallway on her own. But little by little, she started relying on the staff. At the start, it was just for balance. Then, it was for longer distances. Before long, she needed a walker. A few months later, she was using a wheelchair, and once she got used to sitting all day, she rarely got up at all. Then, one morning, I reached for my slippers at the edge of my bed and felt a stiffness in my back that hadn't been there before. When I stood, my knees ached, and my legs felt weaker than I remembered. It dawned on me. I was heading down the same road as Margaret. The less I moved, the harder it became to move at all. Doctors have a saying, use it or lose it. And I learned the truth of that the hard way. Our muscles, our joints, even our hearts need movement to stay strong. The moment we stop using them, they start to fade. And once they're gone, getting them back is nearly impossible. If I could do it over again, I would have fought harder to stay active. If I had insisted on walking to meals instead of taking the easy way, if I had done small exercises each morning, maybe I wouldn't have felt myself slipping so soon. So if you ever find yourself in a place like this, don't wait. Take every chance to move, because once you stop, it's far too easy to never start again. But physical strength wasn't the only thing I lost. I never realized how much privacy mattered until it was gone. Back at home, I could close my door, sit in silence, and let my thoughts wander. I decided when to eat, when to sleep, when to simply sit and do nothing. Even the smallest choices, what to wear, what music to listen to, how to spend my afternoons, were mine to make. But in the nursing home, privacy became a luxury I no longer had. Staff checked in constantly, knocking, but not always waiting for a response before entering. My personal space wasn't really mine anymore. It belonged to the schedule, the caregivers, the rules of the facility. It wasn't that they were unkind, but their job was to keep things running, not to worry about my sense of dignity. The hardest part, though, was how quickly I became dependent on others for things I had done myself for decades. Bathing, dressing, even using the restroom. It all required assistance. And once you start relying on someone else for those basic needs, a part of you starts to disappear. You stop feeling like a person and start feeling like a patient. Then, there was the issue of roommates. Some people get lucky, finding someone they can share a space with peacefully. Others, not so much. I remember a man down the hall who shared a room with someone who snored so loudly, staff could hear it from the hallway. He barely slept for months. But what could he do? In a place like this, you don't get to pick who you live with. I had my own struggles. My roommate liked to keep the TV blaring late into the night, and no matter how many times I asked, he never turned it down. The staff did what they could, but at the end of the day, we were two grown men stuck in the same small space, both unwillingly forced to adjust. I discovered that privacy isn't just about having a room to yourself. It's about control over your space, your body, your choices. And once you trade that away, it's nearly impossible to get it back. If there's one thing I wish I had prepared for, it's how much I would miss simply being alone on my own terms. It's something you don't truly appreciate until it's gone. I used to think that if the nursing home didn't work out, I'd just leave. Simple as that. But I couldn't have been more wrong. Like many others, I walked in believing my stay was temporary. Maybe a few months, maybe a year, just until I got back on my feet. I told myself, if I don't like it, I'll figure something else out. But reality had other plans. First, There was my house. It wasn't waiting for me the way I had imagined. Some folks sell theirs before they move, thinking it's the practical thing to do. Others, like me, leave it sitting empty, only to realize later that an unmaintained home deteriorates fast. The cost of keeping it up, property taxes, utilities, basic maintenance, was too much for my family to shoulder on my behalf. Eventually, they made the tough decision to sell it, telling me it was for the best. I nodded, but inside, I knew what that meant. I wasn't going back. Then, there was my body. When I first arrived, I was still relatively mobile, still capable of handling most things on my own. But time has a way of chipping away at you, especially when you're not as active as you used to be. Stiff joints, weaker muscles, the occasional dizzy spell. Suddenly, living alone wasn't just a question of preference, but of safety. Could I really manage the stairs, cook my own meals, get up in the middle of the night without risking a fall? The more I thought about it, the more I doubted myself. And then, there was my family. They meant well, they really did. But they had settled into their routines, and the idea of upending everything to help me transition back home wasn't something they were eager to discuss. I could hear it in their voices when I brought it up. Hesitation, uncertainty. Not because they didn't love me, but because life had moved forward for them. Lastly, there was the money. Nursing homes are expensive, and the longer you stay, the more it drains your savings. By the time I realized I wanted out, I no longer had the financial flexibility to start over. Rent, home care, even assisted living, all of it required resources I no longer had. The hardest truth I had to face? Many of us come in thinking we have a choice. But once you're here, leaving is much harder than you'd ever expect. Looking back, I realize my regret isn't about aging. It's about assuming a nursing home was my only choice. I wish I had questioned that assumption more. I wish I had looked at every alternative, fought harder to stay in my home, and sought solutions that allowed me to keep my independence just a little longer. Because once you give it up, it's nearly impossible to get back. Let me be clear, not all nursing homes are bad. Some people truly need this level of care. If your health requires around-the-clock attention, then yes, a nursing home might be the right place. But it's important to go in with your eyes open, understanding not just what you gain in safety and convenience, but what you lose in freedom and control. If I could do it over, I would have explored home care, looked into assisted living, or found ways to adapt my house so I could stay longer. I would have asked myself a different question, not just, is this the easiest option, but is this truly what's best for me? Your choices, your independence, your life, hold on to them as long as you can, because once they slip away, you'll miss them more than you ever imagined. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you or a loved one faced a similar decision? What was your experience like? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every one. And if you found this video helpful, consider subscribing and sharing it with someone who might need to hear this. Let's start a conversation, because these choices matter more than we realize.